Hello Internet and welcome to the channel. My name's Frankie and in this video we are playing Planet Zoo Console Edition Career Mode. We are playing the second level in which we're going to be going to Madagascar to help build a primate sanctuary. Now I'm going to take a step back and let the characters from the game take over a little bit and tell you exactly what this story is. I'll see you in a bit.
Welcome to Madagascar. It's quite the change of scenery from dreary old England, huh? Apart from the weather, I suppose. They don't call these places rainforests for nothing. The zoo you'll be working in is an ape sanctuary, where we're doing vitally important conservation work. Not just for apes, but for all kinds of species. But apes, well, apes are some of the closest relatives to humans there are. And yet, the way the world treats them is like, well, very much like some of us treat our actual relatives. Anyway, that's why I'm determined that our operation here does some good. If we can all leave some part of the world in a better state than we found it, we'll have lived lives worth living. And speaking of states, I have a horrible feeling I left the house in the right one. When I get back, I expect my life won't be worth living at all.
What do you think of Madagascar then? Bit warm for my taste, to be honest. Anyway, this is Bernie's primate sanctuary. It's not just primates though, we've got all sorts of animals. So why don't we go and have a look at some of them, eh? We'll start by taking a look at the red-ruffed lemurs. They're the ones that look like they should be in a Shakespeare play. Come on, let's head over to them. Red-ruffed lemurs are found in the rainforests of Masoala. That's in northeast Madagascar. They can actually live anywhere from 15 up to 25 years. Fancy that, eh? Okay, when you're ready, let's go find our Bornean orangutans. The Bornean orangutan is such a marvellous creature. They're always a big favourite at any zoo they feature in, and they're also the biggest tree-dwelling animal on the planet. Assuming you don't count any lions that got stuck up one. Oh, why don't you take a better look at them? Open up their information panel and go into the animal camera. Aren't they just incredible? When you're ready, let's go and have a look-see at some of our beautiful bonobos. They're quite the characters.
I gotta say, I bloody love orangutans, and it's really cool to see a new side of the animations that we've seen so far. We've seen a lot of large quadrupedal animals in the game so far. Looking at the primates and stuff, it's a nice change of pace. They look awesome. Now, I'm gonna be quiet again so Nancy can take over.
Oh dear! It looks like we've arrived just in time. One of the habitat's barriers has collapsed. And wouldn't you know it, one of the bonobos has made a run for it. We'll need to catch them. But before we do, we should box up the other bonobos to stop them escaping too. Select the habitat boundary to bring up the habitat information panel. Good. Now open the Animals tab. Box up the remaining bonobos with Box All Animals. Now, we'll need a vet to recapture that escaped bonobo, but it seems our last one left to do some research in the wild. Not an ideal situation. So, we'll need to hire a replacement, sharpish. Go into the Staff tab of the browser. You can find all of your staff in here, but there's no time to go looking at their particulars at the moment. Hire a vet. Great, now let's deal with our escapee before they can cause too much havoc. Use the animal alerts to jump to the escaped bonobo.
I know you don't actually see it here because I paused the gameplay in order to limit how far that bonobo gets. But I really like how when you hire a new staff member, you just drop them from the sky and then they plop onto the ground like, oh, okay, so this is my new job, and just have to get on with it. Don't know why, I find that really funny.
Then press Call Vet to, yep, you guessed it, call the vet over to capture it. Okay, that's the relief. So while the vet deals with our bonobo friend, let's go fix up their habitat so they can't escape again. Head back over there. As you can see, the barrier's collapsed. Someone's taken their eye off the ball, obviously. Let's get this one replaced. Select the barrier and then we'll edit it. Delete the broken section of barrier and replace it with a brand spanking new one.
There are a couple things that I'm really enjoying about level 2 of career mode at the moment. One of those is the general aesthetic of this park or zoo in Madagascar. I really like all the wood and the proper jungle feeling. I think it's really, really cool. The other thing is I like that we're exploring whole new things to learn. We're not really covering the same stuff again. We're learning new bits.
Good. Now that we've done that, we need to make sure to add climb-proof barriers to the top. That way the bonobos won't be able to climb out. Just make sure you've got the correct piece of barrier selected when you do that. Okay, so go into the options section and select which side the climb-proof barrier needs to go on. And don't get it wrong. We're more worried about bonobos climbing out than guests climbing in. Nicely done. And I think it's high time we unbox those bonobos, wouldn't you say? The poor mites will get sad if we leave them in there for too long. Select the habitat barrier to bring up the habitat information panel again. So, it turns out that as well as the old vet leaving, the zoo's mechanics did too. We'll need to hire a couple of new ones so we can help stop any more breakouts. You see, mechanics do all sorts of helpful things around the zoo, but one of their most important jobs is taking care of the habitat barriers. Without mechanics around to repair them, the barriers will crack, crumble, and fall down. And before you know it, we'll be overrun with escaped animals. Head into the staff tab of the browser again. Gosh, we have been busy, haven't we? Good work there. I'm off for a cuppa. Oh, I think Bernie wants a word with you.
Oh, I hear you had a bit of an issue with an escaped bonobo. The main thing is that you dealt with it swiftly, and more importantly, without the animals stealing someone's clothes, putting them on, and then walking out of the front gate.
I really want to know why that's a concern. Has this happened before? And if so, I'd like to see it, please.
You see, another key responsibility for our vets is animal research. Researching animals allows vets to unlock new enrichment items, additional information for our education resources, enhanced breeding programs, and improvements to food quality. The animals' food, not the vets. It'll take more than a research grant to improve the staff canteen. Anyway, as you can see, research is a key part of running your zoo. In order for a vet to undertake research, they require a research centre. And once again, that's something that this zoo is missing. So let's build one. I've marked out an area for you to put it. Now, you've probably noticed that there's already a building where I want you to build the research centre. Don't worry. You see, the building that's currently there is actually a hollow shell. So we're able to place our new building inside of it. If you select the research centre for placement and then hover over the shell, you'll see that it asks if you want to add the research centre to the existing building. Now, select the building to add it to it. Oh, but that won't place it just yet, though. First, we'll need to rotate our research centre so it automatically connects to the path when we place it.
This task here, even though it appears really simple, is a good introduction into grouping. The grouping mechanism in the game, which kind of binds a load of building materials together and allows you to make cohesive buildings. I think it's a really good intro point. It's very subtle.
Right. Splendid work. Now that we have a brand spanking new research centre, we can give our vets something to do in there. Oh, by the way, it's worth noting that the vets will only do research when they're not required to do any other jobs. That said, you can change what jobs a vet does via their information panel. But let's not worry about that just now. So, Let's get our vet researching ring-tailed lemurs.
Pop open the access menu, head into Zoo Management, then go to the Vet Research section.
Here, you can see a list of all the animals present in your zoo, and also all the potential diseases that can occur.
Now, assign your vet the ring-tailed lemur to start their research.
Actually, thinking about it, I'm not sure we've got any education boards or speakers by the lemur's habitat. Let's head over there and add some, so our guests can learn all about the furry little delights. First off, let's pop down 2 education boards. Place them on the habitat barriers at a height that guests can see, or, if you like, plop them down on a stand.
A couple things that I benefited from with this particular task was, one, using the Align to Surface tool. This allows you to snap things to a surface, like using the screen on this already formed kind of, what do you call it, stand, I guess? Yeah, it allows it to go flush to that pretty easily, because at the moment it's just going through it, but as soon as you put Align to Surface on, boom, it's aligned to surface, and this will be really useful for things like this in the future, especially if you want to build a facade to, say, a keeper's hut or any building. It'll be really easy to place your building components on it by using Align to Surface.
Okay, now that they've been put into position, we have to tell them what animal to display information about. Select one of the education boards to bring up its information panel. And from the drop-down list, select ring-tailed lemur. Although I'm sure that last part was obvious. When you link an education board or a speaker to an animal, you need to make sure that said animal is close by. If it isn't, the guests will get confused and won't learn as much. Okay, now that we've done the education boards, let's pop down a pair of speakers. Speakers play audio to the guests so they can learn while they look at the animals, instead of having to go through the laborious process of reading. Oh, one thing to bear in mind is that it's important not to put the speakers too close together. If you do, the guests won't be able to understand what's being said.
I personally do find these speakers to be quite ugly. I don't think they really look nice in any situation. I have seen people sync them into logs or something at the top of the log. It can look kind of cool like that. But for now, as I'm just trying to learn exactly what I'm being taught by these tutorials, I'm just playing it by the book, exactly what they want me to do. However, in my own zoos, I'm probably going to sink these below the surface of the floor, because I know they still work. They still give off the benefit of the education to the guests, whilst remaining hidden, which will look a lot nicer.
Now we simply need to link the speakers to the ring-tailed lemurs, just like you did with the education boards. Fantastic! Oh, it's worth remembering that education boards and speakers both need power to work. They won't do much good without it.
Oh, it looks as though our vet has completed their research on ring-tailed lemurs. We'll need to collect the results. Head back into the vet research area to take a look at their findings.
Go on, collect your research rewards. Just so you know, vets will continue to research an animal even after successfully completing a research level. I suppose when you're in the zone, you're in the zone. Well, now that we've enriched the lives of our guests, let's enrich the lives of our ring-tailed lemurs. Some animals, like lemurs, will have a climbing need. That means they have a requirement for a certain amount of climbing space, and you can fulfill that requirement by building them a climbing frame. Let's find out how much more climbing space our lemur friends need, shall we? Select one of them and bring up their information panel.
Next, hop over to the Terrain tab.
Now, as you can see, the lemurs need quite a lot more climbing space. But as it happens, I've already got a climbing frame blueprint built for you. So you can either pop that down or build one yourself from scratch. By the way, it's not always just climbing needs that you have to worry about. Other animals might need a certain amount of water in their habitat so they can go for a swim. They certainly do keep us on our toes.
As you can see, even though I meant to be placing the climbing frame for these guys, I went ahead and started to manipulate the ground surface a little bit. I don't know why it bothers me so much, but if an animal's welfare is affected by its enclosure, and the enclosure is so easy to fix when it comes to terrain and stuff, I feel like it's a really easy fix. If it's affected by that at all, I'm going to change it because it just bothers me that it's not 100%. But when it actually comes to placing this climbing frame thingy, it's quite large and I had two things to consider. One, there's a feeding platform on the floor that we need to try and avoid. We don't want to be stopping the animals from getting to their feeding platform because they may starve. I'm not entirely sure how the climbing frame would interact with it, if it would stop them using it or not. But it's better to be safe than sorry, so I'm going to try and avoid that with my placement. And another thing is, the climbing frame is quite tall in this particular blueprint that we've been provided with. So I want to make sure that it's not too close to the barrier where the guests are looking down into the enclosure, because I'm not sure, but there's every chance the lemurs will just jump out and start like messing about with the guests, and that's not ideal.
Oh, that's a great climbing frame for them. They're going to absolutely love it. Do you know what would make them even happier though? Nicer food. But that's true of all of us though, isn't it? You can unlock better quality food for animals through research. Luckily, we've already unlocked some for the lemurs, so all that remains is to make sure they get served it from now on. Let's bring up the habitat information panel by selecting the lemur habitat. So, a new climbing frame and better food. Oh, you've really spoilt those lemurs rotten. Now, I think it's time we looked at one of the zoo's most important responsibilities. Releasing animals into the wild. You see, when we feel an animal is ready, we can release them into the wild. But what makes an animal a good candidate for release? Well, their age is an important factor. I mean, we can't release an animal that's a juvenile, just as we can't release one that's gotten too old. They'll also need to be fertile. After all, the idea is to repopulate the wild, so the best candidates will have a high fertility gene. And together, the age and fertility of a candidate will determine how many conservation credits we'll be rewarded when we release them. Now, conservation credits are vitally important. They're the lifeblood of your zoo, because earning them allows you to adopt even more animals. And what's more, the animals you can adopt will be of a higher quality. So, with that in mind, let's pop over to our orangutan habitat.
I'd like you to find Agang, the Bornean orangutan in the habitat, and select him, please. You can go through each orangutan in turn, or select the habitat barrier, go to the Animals tab in the Habitat Information panel, and find him in the Animals list.
I know it's sad to see him go, but he'll be happy out in the wild. And he's a wonderful candidate for release. Young, strong, and fertile. Excellent work there. You've definitely got potential, you know.
Ah, I see you've been doing some homework. Although, it hardly seems like work when you're learning about something as adorable as a ring-tailed lemur. I imagine I'd have got much better grades at school if there'd been less algebra and more aldebra. Tortoises.
Good old Bernie, turning up for a classic zinger and then disappearing again with no explanation.
Okay, so far we've done a lot of work with habitat animals, but now it's time to learn all about exhibit animals. Let's build a brand new exhibit. I've marked an area for our new exhibit. How about we head over there? Lovely. Now let's build a new exhibit in the gap that's been left. Just add it to the building like we did with the research centre earlier, then pop it into the gap. Perfect. The next thing to do is adopt an exhibit animal to go in there. How about a Gila monster? Open up the exhibit trading section and adopt one.
Just as we do with habitat animals, we need to send the Gila monster to the exhibit. Select the exhibit to send it there.
When you send an animal to an exhibit, it'll automatically be given the correct setup. But that doesn't mean it's completely ready for them. So let's finish it off.
We'll start by adding some enrichment items. Head over to the exhibit's information panel.
As I'm sure you know by now, you can unlock more enrichment levels by having one of your vets do some research.
Now we'll also need to set the temperature and humidity in the exhibit. These are vitally important for keeping our Gila monster happy and comfortable. Open the Climate tab. That's the ticket. And the last thing we need to look at is setting up the different windows. So open up the Windows tab.
You can edit and customize any of the windows on an exhibit. A window can be closed and blank, or have a two-dimensional background, or even a three-dimensional background on it. Why don't you have a play around with the options? There's also an exhibit education board. Pop them down near your exhibit to teach your guests about them. Let's add one now.
One annoying thing that I found with these exhibits was placing the decorations on the windows. It's not entirely clear which window you're selecting. I'm not entirely sure how you'd make that any clearer, other than numbering them as they have. I'm not entirely sure what you do to actually make this any better. But either way, it's kind of annoying that I had to go through and test each window to find out what I was doing. Placing these little plaques that give you some information on what's in the exhibit is another really good way of forcing the player to familiarise themselves with the advanced move tools and stuff. As you can see, because I have the align to surface mode on, I'm constantly accidentally putting it on the glass and even the roof at one point. So it can be a little bit finicky, but it's good to be practicing in such a relaxed environment rather than wasting time when you're trying to build your own zoo. It's good to get this stuff out of the way with the tutorial specific levels.
Just like the education boards and speakers we put down for the ring-tailed lemurs, you'll need to link these to the Gila monster. Go on. Lovely stuff. Now our guests can learn all about our venomous friend here. Right, now, I've got a bit of a big job for you. I need you to increase the number of species in the zoo. You'll probably want to adopt both habitat and exhibit animals to do so, which will mean building plenty of new habitats and exhibits for them. Go on, off you pop. I'll check in with you when you're almost done.
Now I've cut out a little bit of footage here, and that is just to save you guys time. I spent not a long time, but a decent portion of time flying about the zoo, finding some empty areas to introduce new species, as my current mission is to have 12 species in the park, and that means I need to introduce 3 new species. I found one empty facade for an exhibit animal, so I'm going to be placing something in there, and I also locate somewhere for a large habitat. And what you can see me doing right here was going through the animal list, and that's the list of animals that we already have in the zoo, familiarising myself with what species we already have, so that when it comes to going and purchasing or adopting new animals for the zoo, I know exactly which ones I'm actually able to buy without doubling up. Speaking of, it's time to adopt our first animal, and that is going to be some giant tiger land snails. And they're going to be going into this exhibit, the one that had an empty facade that I've just installed a new one into. And that will give us 1 new species for the zoo taking our total up to 10, which means we're only going to need 2 more. And before I leave this little guy to enjoy his home, I'm going to need to make sure that the humidity and the temperature is right within the exhibit so that its welfare doesn't plummet. And I'm also going to introduce any enrichment items that are available. And normally with these exhibits, they will be things like rocks or logs or maybe a heat lamp or something. Just small little things that increase the quality of life for these smaller critters. After scouting the map again, I found this large area which already has some pre-built paths and a large open space, which will be perfect for introducing a habitat animal. And I'm going to be adopting the Western chimpanzee. That is the only primate on the list that's available in the animal market that isn't already in the zoo. So clearly it's the best option. Once I had established which species were going to be going into this large habitat, I went to their Zoopedia page and started to look at some of the requirements. And as you can see, they need a grade 3 climb-proof boundary that is at least 5 meters tall. And that makes sense because chimpanzees love a good climb. Now, I'm going to put all of this building into time-lapse for you so that I'm not wasting too much time. When it comes to building the enclosure for these chimpanzees, I made a fairly simple oblong shape. I didn't want to do anything fancy, and I made sure that it was the minimum height that we had got from the Zoopedia page. When it came to making a staff entrance, I wanted to link it up with a staff-only path to one of the stairwells. Annoyingly, I didn't realise that the stairwells had already been made that way. One was a staff-only stairwell, but I chose the wrong one. So later on I have to switch them over, but it's no big deal. I promptly made sure to add some climbing structures to the enclosure for the chimps, as obviously that's going to be a big part of their enrichment. I chose a large structure that was already made. It was a blueprint. And annoyingly, because I can't alter the ground level due to the restrictions that are in place in these tutorial levels, the structure that I had built wasn't actually on the floor in all areas. So some of the actual structure is hovering off the ground. So to remedy that, I lower the whole thing slightly into the ground, which does mean that certain areas aren't actually accessible by our chimpanzees. Annoying as that is, it does help us to fill their climbing need, and we're not gonna try and make this enclosure perfect. I install another climbing frame for them just so they have a bit of variation, and then start to litter the entire enclosure with various forms of enrichment. And one of my favourite ones is the tiny piano. I just think it's hilarious that they slap on a little keyboard, playing their own songs. Imagine him playing Beethoven or something. Or actually, I'm not 100% sure that Beethoven was a pianist, so don't know if that joke makes any sense. I know that Amadeus was. Wolfgang Amadeus, yes. He was good on a keyboard. Not a keyboard, piano. Okay, this tangent's over. Next, I was just littering the enclosure with various types of foliage, trying to make sure there's a nice variety in both species of plant and scale of plant. Here you can see me hanging some vines from the hard shelter I put in for them, but annoyingly they were coming off at a weird angle. So to remedy this, I selected all of them, and then I went into the advanced move tools and started to play about with the various axes and things, just the various ways of moving it. It was quite a good little exercise for me to kind of familiarise myself with these advanced move tools. To make the application of the foliage in this enclosure a bit simpler, I decided to bunch a load together, make a nice little variety, and then I could highlight all of it and copy and paste it around the edge of the enclosure. And in theory, this is an excellent idea. But because I can't actually change the slope or gradient of the earth, when I copy and pasted the clump of foliage around the enclosure, it didn't make sense in some places. It was clipping in and out of the ground, so I had to make lots of adjustments to the angle of what the plants were going down like. So it doesn't work the best in this enclosure, but it's a good practice for future uses in a more flat or just a more consistently shaped and sloped kind of enclosure. It's good practice. All of this is excellent, and that's why I think it's so important for us as new players to be playing this campaign mode. Yes, we've all seen the YouTubers making amazing franchise mode or sandbox mode zoos, and we want to do that. We want to unleash our creativity, but this is how we learn. Doing these things, you're getting in the repetitions, and you're learning how to do really cool stuff before going out and venturing on your own, meaning that you will be fully equipped when it comes to doing your own projects, which is what we all want. One of the last things to do for this enclosure is make sure that the borders have some glass so that our guests can actually see into the enclosure, and also to make sure that there's some education boards and speakers and donation bins. Obviously there's no point in having these animals if our guests can't see them, and if they can see them they need to be able to learn about them, therefore prompting them to potentially donate a little bit of money to the kind of upkeep cost of these animals. And I think it turns out pretty well, because as you'll see in a second, we very quickly get a large audience here. It becomes a little bit tight and difficult to move. I had to put in some power just over there on the staff path, keeping it away from the guests as to not have a negative effect on them. Not too much of a big deal. I think it still works pretty nicely. So as I said, it's getting pretty tight here, and with only one species left to add to the park, I thought I should go and place another exhibit animal. That way it'll be nice and quick and I don't have to build a whole other enclosure or find space to do so. And luckily enough, at the top round this viewing gallery there is an empty facade. A nice little place to pop an exhibit potentially. And I want to try and uphold this aesthetic we've already got going, the wood and bamboo kind of look. So the idea is to place an exhibit inside there, and the logs at the bottom of this shop here, these ones, yep, I'm going to duplicate those and move them over so that at the bottom of our exhibit we don't see the black plastic, and instead we get a nice wooden outside, and it just makes it a little bit more immersive. You can see here I accidentally placed it a little bit too far back, and that's fine. In order to remedy that, you just have to remove the item from the group or split group, and then you can like shuffle it about as much as you like, and it fortunately does come forward enough for me to be able to squeeze something behind it. And regardless of how easy that bit was, it's not quite as easy to actually put the exhibit in here. For some reason it wouldn't snap to that area. It insisted on being placed beneath this facade, despite me adding it to the group, and it took me ages to figure out what was going on. One thing that I did to fix this was to turn on auto stacking. I believe what that means is it kind of senses where the nearest ground layer is, which in this case would be the wooden platform on the bottom of the facade bit that's already there, and it will then place it on top of that rather than just trying to, I don't know, squeeze it in wherever. Maybe it was ground level it was trying to get it to. I'm not entirely sure. I'm not 100% sure of all ins and outs just yet, but I'm learning, and that is the entire point of this. So yeah, there's a lot of problem solving here, which is excellent because it's really going to help when it comes to building your own zoos later. Like, now that I've got it in place, it was hovering a little bit and it was sticking out of the roof. It was clearly resting on something. So to try and fix that, I removed these logs from the front, as I figured it might be catching on that, and then I can try to pop the exhibit back in there. And it took a little bit of adjustment, but it did work. This actually was the thing that was causing the issue. So that's awesome. We've got some creative problem solving going on straight away. And once the exhibit is in and we're happy with the placement, we can start to decorate it a little bit. And the first thing that I'm going to do is use those wooden logs that are lining the side of the shop and place them back in front of the exhibit. Also, those tiles or panels at the top of the shop, the bamboo-y looking things with some patterned stripes on them, we're going to try and duplicate those and replicate that pattern to try and create a border to this exhibit. Hopefully by covering this plastic it will just be a bit more immersive and will look better overall. Now, something that's quite annoying about the placement of these is that randomization, or the random rotation is still on at this point, and this is excellent for plants. That's how you get a nice natural and organic looking dispersal of plants, by having random rotation on. But in this case it's just annoying So we're going to leave align to surface on, as that will help us massively, but we're going to turn off the random rotation because that's just getting in the way. But once I've got it in a good place, we're going to go and fetch some Goliath frogs, put them in this exhibit, and then we should be done.
My, you have been busy, haven't you? Splendid! But now that you've adopted all these lovely new species, we need to make sure they're nice and happy. So let's get the average welfare across the zoo nice and high, shall we? And by we, I mean you. Go on, get to it.
The next task is one of my favourite tasks so far. It's happened in both this zoo and a previous one, and that is just to raise the welfare of all the animals. I don't know why, but I really enjoy doing this. And first things first, as we've just introduced a new species to the zoo, we need to get a vet researching it so that we can have a better diet for it, and we can ensure that it has some enrichment to just improve its overall experience within its enclosure. Once we're happy with the welfare of these frogs, it's time to go to our animal list where we get to view all the animals in the park, and then we can pinpoint what species are suffering with their welfare. Basically, if it's not green, then it's worth checking out. And here the bonobos are lacking basically any form of enrichment. And that means that we get to litter their enclosure with various toys and food enrichment items, which is awesome. I really like the variation in toys in particular. I like that you've got bongo drums and puzzle boxes, the little keyboards that I've already mentioned. They're really cool. And you've also got the mirror tower thingy. I'm not entirely sure what it's called. It's like a bunch of dangling mirrors, which is great for primates because they're one of the few species that can actually register themselves in their reflection. And there are also lots of cool options for the food enrichment. For instance, this, what's it called, foraging box? Yeah, so the idea is it's a large leafy area that has been pre-established by keepers obviously, and then you can bury food and stuff in amongst it, and it just forces the animals to use their brains in a new way. Just like with this termite hill, you're going to be forcing the animals to get into the termite hill, solving problems, normally using sticks like they do in the wild, hopefully. And then, of course, you get to the complete opposite end of the spectrum, and you just give them a cardboard box to play with. Yeah, you go from super intelligent to playing with a cardboard box, which we all love doing. Let's not lie to ourselves. We all hid in boxes as kids, or at least I did. I think we all did it. Okay, going off on a tangent again. Yeah, I really like the range of enrichment items here. And once we're done with the bonobos, we're going to have a look at the hippos, because they're the only other ones that are slightly below what we want them to be in terms of welfare. But by the time we get over to the enclosure, the statistics have clearly caught up because Nancy pops up to say that we've done a good job, and then that's kind of it for this level. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to give it a thumbs up. Leave some comments on what you want to see me building in franchise mode, and anything else that you want to see on the channel going forward. Make sure to subscribe if you want to see more Planet Zoo playthroughs on the channel, and thank you for watching. Until next time, I'll see you later.